What if the stories we tell about human history are built on sand? Across continents and centuries, archaeologists, scientists, and curious wanderers have unearthed things that shouldn't exist, objects whose very presence fractures the clean, linear story of human evolution and invention. A spark plug embedded in ancient stone, a gear-driven computer pulled from a Roman-era shipwreck, a set of footprints in volcanic ash that suggests someone, wearing shoes, walked across the Earth nearly 4 million years ago. Each artifact, taken alone, might be dismissed. A fluke, a misreading, an oddity best left in the footnotes of science. But taken together, they whisper a different narrative, one where the past is stranger, deeper, and more technologically capable than we dare admit. These aren't tales of aliens or magic, but of forgotten ingenuity, of timelines disrupted, of knowledge lost and then rediscovered, perhaps more than once. This documentary isn't about proving a grand theory. It's about listening to the silence between the facts, to the unease in the gaps of our knowledge, and to the resilience of those who dared to challenge what they were told must be impossible. In the 1930s, a hammer was discovered embedded in rock dated to be over 400 million years old. Its head was made from an iron alloy so pure that even today, metallurgy struggles to match it. Later, divers off the Greek coast found a rusted bronze device aboard a sunken ship. What they thought was a navigational tool turned out to be an astronomical computer, an analog machine that could calculate eclipses and planetary motion, built centuries before mechanical clocks were ever conceived. These are not isolated events. Time and again, artifacts emerge that do not fit the expected pattern. A pot discovered in Massachusetts, adorned with intricate floral inlays, found in rock 100,000 years old. A spark plug encased in geologic layers that predate the internal combustion engine by 500,000 years. Batteries in Iraq, carved stones in Peru, and a tiny figurine in Idaho, each challenging the boundaries of accepted knowledge. Yet the response from institutions is often the same: skepticism, silence, and refusal. Museums decline to display them. Journals refuse to publish. Access is restricted, explanations dismissed. Perhaps the threat is not the object itself, but what it represents. A chasm between the world we know and the one that might have been. As we journey through these stories, 14 fragments of a puzzle scattered through time, we'll ask not just what they are, but what they mean. What does it say about us, that we ignore the things we can't explain? What do we lose when we edit the past to make it more comfortable? This isn't a journey of certainty. It's a meditation on mystery, a walk through the shadows of human potential, and an invitation to remember that history is not a settled story. It is a question we are still learning how to ask. It began with a walk through the Texas Hill Country in 1936. Max and Emma Hahn were exploring near a waterfall outside London, Texas, when they spotted something curious lodged in a rock. At first glance, it looked like a chunk of wood, but upon breaking it open, they found a hammer. Its wooden handle partially fossilized, the iron head sealed in ancient stone. Geologists who examined the artifact later determined the surrounding rock was over 400 million years old. Yet the hammer's composition, 96.6% iron with trace amounts of sulfur and chlorine, defied the timeline. Such metallurgical precision wasn't possible until the modern industrial era. Even more baffling, the iron showed no signs of rust, its molecular structure hinting at techniques unknown to current metallurgy. How could a tool like this end up encased in stone hundreds of millions of years old, long before mammals, let alone humans, walked the earth? Some called it a hoax. Others suggested the hammer somehow worked its way into ancient rock through unexplained geological processes. But those explanations fray under scrutiny. The partial fossilization of the wooden handle, the non-oxidized iron, the impossible age of the formation, it didn't add up. In 1983, metallurgist Carl Baugh conducted further tests. The results were staggering. The hammer's iron was so pure and its structure so unusual that no known smelting process, ancient or modern, could account for it. He tried to publish his findings. Scientific journals refused. Some acknowledged the quality of his work, but none would print it. To this day, the London hammer resides in private hands. It has been shown to independent labs, analyzed quietly, and then, just as quietly, ignored. Why? Because this hammer isn't just an object. It's a crack in the wall of conventional history. If accepted as genuine, it would suggest that humans, or something capable of advanced metallurgy, existed on Earth hundreds of millions of years ago. That possibility doesn't just challenge the timeline, it shatters it. And so the hammer is denied a place in museums. Its existence is edited out of textbooks. It is easier to forget than to reconsider the foundations of science, but it remains, a silent, ironclad contradiction resting in the stillness of a private collection. The London hammer asks no questions, it simply exists. Yet in that quiet existence, it beckons us to ask, what if we are not the first? What if progress is not a straight line, but a spiral, circling again and again through ages we've chosen to forget? In 1901, off the coast of the Greek island Antikythera, sponge divers stumbled upon the remnants of a Roman shipwreck. Amidst amphorae and statues, they retrieved something else, something small, corroded, and initially overlooked. It looked like little more than a lump of bronze fused to rotting wood. But decades later, when technology caught up, the world glimpsed the hidden soul of the artifact. Inside that encrusted shell was a machine, an intricate network of interlocking gears, dials, and inscriptions. Over 30 bronze components moved in harmony. It wasn't just an astrolabe or a navigational tool. It was a computer, an analog device capable of calculating lunar cycles, predicting solar eclipses, and modeling planetary motion with astonishing precision. The Antikythera mechanism had no right to exist. Historians had long taught that such mechanical sophistication didn't arrive until the invention of geared clocks in medieval Europe, over 1,000 years later. Yet here was a device, forged in the 1st century BCE, that incorporated differential gears and mathematical principles that seemed centuries out of place. It tracked the Metonic cycle, the Saros eclipse cycle, and even the 4-year Olympic calendar. It was, quite literally, a universe in bronze, crafted with a depth of astronomical understanding that stunned modern scientists. CT scans in the 21st century revealed even more complexity. Behind the corroded faces were hidden inscriptions, additional gearing systems, and indications that the mechanism once modeled the movements of all known planets. Some researchers believe it might not have been unique, that it came from a lost tradition of scientific craftsmanship. But if so, where are the others? None have been found. Not a single workshop, blueprint, or mention in surviving texts. The Antikythera mechanism stands alone, like a memory from a dream that shouldn't exist in waking life. Efforts to reconstruct it with modern tools reveal just how extraordinary it truly is. Matching its tolerances and mechanical elegance strained even today's machine shops. The ancient engineers who built it weren't experimenting. They knew exactly what they were doing. And yet the device is displayed behind glass as a wonder of the ancient world, its revolutionary implications quietly glossed over. Educational texts praise Greek ingenuity but avoid the deeper question. How did this level of knowledge appear so suddenly, only to vanish without a trace? Was it the product of a lone genius, a forgotten academy, or a remnant of something older, deeper, erased by time? The Antikythera mechanism doesn't just bend the timeline, it suggests that humanity's capacity for wonder, for calculation, for cosmic understanding may not be new at all. Perhaps we've been here before. Perhaps the stars have always whispered secrets, waiting for us to build the right gears to listen. And perhaps we did, only to forget, until the sea gave one back. In the barren hills of California's Koso Mountains, 1961, 3 amateur rock collectors cracked open a geode in search of crystals. What they found instead would fracture their understanding of time. Inside the ancient stone, they discovered a small object with threaded metal, a ceramic insulator, and unmistakable signs of human craftsmanship. It looked eerily like a spark plug, modern in every respect, but the rock surrounding it was dated to be at least 500,000 years old. At that point in Earth's story, humans hadn't invented writing, let alone internal combustion engines. The artifact became known as the Koso artifact, and its implications were staggering. X-ray scans revealed a hexagonal casing, spring-like mechanisms, and precisely machined components. Everything about it echoed 20th century design. And yet, geological analysis insisted the rock encasing it had formed naturally over hundreds of thousands of years. No evidence of tampering, no signs of intrusion, just a mechanical object nestled in prehistoric stone. Geologists who examined the artifact faced a conundrum. Either the dating was wrong or the artifact wasn't what it appeared to be. But independent labs confirmed the rock's age again and again. The spark plug remained the same, impossible but undeniable. When the collectors brought it to academic institutions, the response was cold. Museums refused to display it. Journals declined to publish. The narrative, they said, didn't fit. Some claimed it must have been a hoax. Others suggested it was a modern object that had somehow infiltrated ancient layers, despite the lack of geological disruption. Eventually, the artifact faded from public view, tucked away in private hands. Access to the site where it was found became restricted under new environmental protections. Testing was halted. Curiosity was muffled. And the Koso artifact became a ghost, but it still haunts the imagination. If genuine, it tells a story no textbook has prepared us for, a tale of technology reaching far back into time, long before we believe we began to dream of such things. It suggests a loop, not a ladder, a past where invention bloomed early and was lost, buried beneath epochs of forgetting. Could it be that we've reached this level before? That civilizations have risen, only to fall, leaving behind relics that we cannot or will not explain? The Koso artifact doesn't demand belief. It only asks us to consider a question. What happens when something real doesn't fit our version of reality? In the dusty ruins of ancient Mesopotamia, a clay jar sat quietly in the earth for over 2 millennia. In 1936, German archaeologist Wilhelm Koenig uncovered this artifact near Baghdad, Iraq. At first glance, it resembled a simple vessel, but inside, copper cylinders and iron rods told a different story. When filled with an acidic liquid, the jar produced electricity. It became known as the Baghdad battery. Simple, functional, and baffling. With only vinegar or lemon juice, the jar generated over a volt of electric current, enough to power small devices, enough to electroplate gold onto silver, and perhaps enough to challenge the core of what we think we know about ancient science. Multiple similar jars were found in the same area, and tests confirmed that these artifacts weren't symbolic or decorative. They were engineered with purpose. The materials were precisely arranged, sealed with asphalt, and bore corrosion patterns matching prolonged electrochemical use. Electrical engineers verified their function. The evidence was not theoretical. The battery worked, but what was it for? Who used it? And why had this knowledge disappeared? Some scholars suggested it may have been used for ritualistic purposes. Others proposed it powered electroplating for ancient jewelers. But the fact remained. Ancient Mesopotamians, 2,000 years before Franklin's kite or Edison's bulb, had discovered electricity and how to harness it. When Koenig tried to publish his findings, the pushback was swift. Academics dismissed the batteries as misidentified religious objects. Museums labeled them enigmatic but avoided deeper inquiry. And yet, replicas of the Baghdad battery continue to work today. Was this just a curious outlier in human innovation, or a glimpse of a broader technological tradition that never made it into the historical record? If electricity was once discovered, used, and then forgotten, what else might we have lost? The Baghdad battery hums with quiet implications. It reminds us that history does not always move forward. Knowledge can vanish. Innovation can be buried. Entire disciplines may be born, flourish, and then fall into dust, leaving behind artifacts that make no sense to the inheritors of a different age. We often think of history as a staircase, each step leading to the next, but sometimes it's a circuit, a closed loop waiting to be reconnected. And in the silence between volts, a forgotten current still pulses through time. It was 1851, and the clang of pickaxes echoed through Meeting House Hill in Dorchester, Massachusetts. Workers were blasting rock for construction when something unexpected emerged from the rubble. 15 feet below the surface, embedded in ancient stone, they found a small metallic vessel, delicate, ornamental, and utterly out of place. The artifact was shaped like a bell, made from an unknown metal alloy, adorned with intricate floral inlays and geometric designs. Its craftsmanship was impeccable. Decorative etchings suggested a level of artistry and technical precision that rivaled anything from the 19th century and far exceeded it. Geologists at the time estimated the rock layer to be over 100,000 years old. Yet the Dorchester pot, as it came to be known, was clearly the work of intelligent hands. Its walls were uniformly thick. The metal surface had been treated with techniques that hinted at advanced metallurgy, processes not developed until the modern industrial era. And the patterns covering it? Inlaid with silver, precise as clockwork, and radiating a beauty that spoke of forgotten culture. Was it a hoax? A misplaced artifact that somehow sank into ancient stone? Initial studies said no. The Boston Society of Natural History confirmed its geological context and published early findings. But as the artifact's implications grew clearer, support waned. Further research was quietly abandoned. The pot was dismissed as a curiosity, a geological anomaly. Then it disappeared. No museum would display it. No institution would claim it. The Dorchester pot vanished from public record, leaving behind only newspaper clippings and withdrawn scientific reports. Its mystery endured. If authentic, the Dorchester pot is not just an object, it is a message, a delicate echo from a forgotten world. A world where metal was shaped with purpose, where design and function merged into art, and where such capabilities existed long before recorded history. The pot doesn't tell us who made it, or why, but it stands as silent proof that human, or perhaps human-like, ingenuity may have dawned in eras we've long since walled off with disbelief. What if civilization is not a recent invention? What if beauty, precision, and purpose were born in ages buried far deeper than we've dared to dig? In that bell-shaped vessel, cast in the shadow of ancient stone, lies an uncomfortable possibility, that we have remembered far less than we have forgotten. In the dark depths of South African mines, where workers carve into rock nearly 3 billion years old, something strange began to emerge. They were small metallic spheres, smooth, perfectly rounded, some etched with 3 parallel grooves that circled their circumference like lathe marks. These were not fossils, not natural concretions. They were too uniform, too precise. And they came from the Precambrian strata, formed at a time when Earth's surface barely harbored life. Miners unearthed hundreds of them. Now known as the Klerksdorp spheres, these objects range in size from 1 to 4 inches, made of hard materials like pyrophyllite and hematite. Some were hollow, Others contained unknown substances that defied chemical identification. But the real mystery lies in their construction. Geological testing showed they were embedded in rock nearly 3 billion years old. That's before the rise of multicellular life, before oxygen, before anything that could be called intelligent. And yet the spheres appear machined, marked with grooves too consistent to be chance. Their density is uniform, their balance nearly perfect. Some researchers argue they are natural formations, but side-by-side comparisons with man-made objects reveal similarities too striking to ignore. Others have tried to explain them away as pseudo-fossils or mineral formations with coincidental symmetry. But symmetry does not explain the grooves, the internal hollowness, the inexplicable materials, and so they sit in quiet exhibits in a handful of museums labeled curiosities. Their full story untold. Scientific institutions hesitate to investigate further. Requests for advanced analysis are denied. Some geologists admit privately that these objects shouldn't exist, but publicly, silence holds. If the Klerksdorp spheres are artificial, they challenge not just human history, but planetary history. They suggest the existence of technology billions of years before humanity, before mammals, before life as we know it. Could Earth have hosted intelligent activity in an age we consider primordial? Is it possible that what we call civilization is merely the latest cycle of emergence, and not the first? The grooves on those ancient spheres are more than marks. They are scars on our certainty. Evidence etched not in books or myths, but in the stone bones of Earth itself. Perhaps the Earth has secrets older than life. Perhaps the rock remembers what we have forgotten. And perhaps deep underground, the past is still speaking, if only we're willing to listen. Along the banks of Romania's Mureș River in 1974, a group of construction workers uncovered something extraordinary buried in gravel beside the bones of a long-extinct mastodon. Two of the objects were fossils, no surprise in that region. But the third was a wedge-shaped piece of metal, about 8 inches long, with machined angles, precision curves, and a surface unlike anything seen in nature. What stunned researchers wasn't just the shape, it was the material. Tests revealed the wedge was made from an aluminum alloy. But aluminum doesn't occur naturally in metallic form. It must be extracted through complex industrial processes that weren't developed until the 19th century. Yet here it was, buried in Pleistocene-era sediment dated to at least 20,000 years ago, long before the Bronze Age, long before smelting, long before recorded civilization. The artifact became known as the Aiud wedge. Further analysis revealed even more anomalies. The alloy's composition didn't match modern aluminum production. It had a unique blend of elements, suggesting an unfamiliar metallurgical process. Tool marks indicated machine finishing, cutting, drilling, shaping, all requiring technologies that should not have existed in that epoch. Some speculated it was part of a flying machine, a tool, a structural component. Its aerodynamic shape and engineered form hinted at function. But when Romanian archaeologists tried to publish their findings, the backlash was immediate. Institutions dismissed the wedge as modern contamination. Journals refused to consider it. Excavation of the site was halted, and eventually the artifact disappeared from public access. Still, photographs, lab reports, and independent analyses persisted. Quiet evidence of a truth too disruptive to embrace. What do we do with an object like the Aiud wedge? It doesn't fit in our timeline. It doesn't serve our narrative. And so it's locked away, not in a vault but in collective denial. But its implications remain. If authentic, it suggests that industrial technology, aluminum processing, precision engineering existed tens of thousands of years before accepted history allows. That ancient hands, somewhere in the mist of prehistory, built machines with materials we only recently learned to manipulate. What kind of world produced such a tool? What knowledge was held and then lost? The Aiud wedge is more than metal. It is a sliver of time misfiled, a fragment from a forgotten chapter. And like all the others, it poses a quiet challenge. Is our past truly what we think it is? Or is it what remains when the rest has been forgotten, buried, or ignored? In the arid plains near Ica, Peru, stones have been whispering stories for nearly a century. Stories no textbook dares to echo. Since the 1930s, thousands of carved andesite stones have been unearthed by farmers, travelers, and researchers. They are heavy, black, and ancient. But it's not their composition that stirs controversy. It's what's carved into them. Dinosaurs, surgical operations, telescopes, flying machines. Scenes etched with shocking detail depict humans performing heart transplants and brain surgery, people observing celestial events with instruments, figures coexisting with dinosaurs, creatures believed to have vanished 65 million years before humans arrived. Known as the Ica stones, these artifacts defy every timeline we've accepted. Dr. Javier Cabrera, a local physician and professor, amassed a collection of over 15,000 stones. He believed they were remnants of a forgotten civilization, one that possessed advanced medical, astronomical, and technological knowledge. Skeptics scoffed. Hoax, they said, a modern forgery. But chemical analyses of the carvings revealed wear patterns and oxidation consistent with great age. Some stones bore sediment and mineral accretions that would be impossible to fake. Still, academic institutions dismissed them without full examination. Museums refused to display them, and Peruvian authorities restricted access to discovery sites, declaring them off-limits for conservation. But the stones remain, stacked in back rooms, hidden in private collections, surfacing occasionally in photos that circulate like rumors. They ask questions no one wants to answer. If authentic, the Ica stones suggest that humanity once possessed a level of sophistication far beyond what we associate with ancient Peru. Not just knowledge of anatomy, but the tools and training to apply it. Not just awareness of the stars, but the instruments to track them. Not just imagination, but engineering. Are they echoes of a lost civilization? Evidence of an alternate chronology? Or something even stranger, a record of memory itself, etched into rock? We may never know for certain. But the Ica stones remind us that truth is not always comfortable, that history is written not only by the victors, but by the survivors, and that even survivors can forget. Perhaps the most haunting image carved into those stones isn't a dinosaur or a scalpel. It's a man looking up at the sky through a telescope aimed at the stars. Not because he discovered something new, but because he was trying to remember something lost. In the rolling fields of Nampa, Idaho, 1889, a drilling rig pierced deep into the earth, 320 feet down, through layers of clay untouched by human hands for millions of years. Then, like a secret slipping through time, it emerged. A tiny figurine, carved from clay, fired with care, shaped unmistakably as a human female, complete with delicate features, proportional limbs, and artistic detail that suggested not just craftsmanship, but culture. Geologists examined the strata from which it came. Pliocene clay over 2 million years old, far older than any known human artifact. Long before Homo sapiens, before Neanderthals, before even the earliest stone tools. The Nampa figurine, as it came to be called, wasn't just an anomaly. It was an impossibility. Its ceramic composition required controlled heat. Its form implied aesthetic intention. Someone made this. Someone with hands that could shape meaning from earth and fire. And they did it in a time when, according to every history book, no such hands should have existed. When word spread, disbelief followed. Scientists insisted it must be a contamination, a modern object that somehow slipped into ancient layers. But drilling experts attested to the well's integrity. There was no evidence of intrusion. The artifact had come from deep within undisturbed geological deposits. For a brief moment, the Geological Society of Boston considered the evidence. But then the pattern repeated. Interest faded. Research halted. The figurine vanished into obscurity, its whereabouts now unknown. And yet the questions it raised still echo. What kind of being made this? How many others were there? And why have we found only this one? Art is not born from necessity. It is born from thought, from the need to express, to remember, to reach beyond survival into the realm of meaning. The Nampa figurine suggests that spark ignited far earlier than we believe. Could it be that symbolic thought, the essence of culture, began not tens of thousands of years ago, but millions? And if so, what stories did those first artists tell? The figurine does not speak, but in its silence lies a provocative truth. Creativity may be the oldest human trait of all. And if our ancestors could dream in clay before they could even write, what else did they dream and lose before we ever began to remember? In 1976, in the volcanic plains of Laetoli, Tanzania, paleoanthropologist Mary Leakey made a discovery that seemed to confirm our origins. Preserved in hardened ash were footprints, 3 hominids walking side by side, their steps frozen in time for 3.6 million years. The prints were hailed as the oldest evidence of bipedalism, proof that early ancestors had walked upright long before we thought possible. But as researchers studied the impressions more closely, discomfort settled in. The footprints didn't just show upright walking. They showed modern walking. Heel strikes, arches, toe-offs, distinct markers of a gait nearly identical to ours. Even more unsettling were impressions suggesting the presence of foot coverings, subtle boundaries around the toes, pressure patterns hinting at soles. Could it be shoes? If true, these were not the tracks of primitive beings on the cusp of evolution. They were, in form and function, ours. But such a notion couldn't be allowed. The idea that anatomically modern humans, or anyone capable of making and wearing footwear, had walked the earth millions of years ago was unthinkable, and so the findings were reframed. The prints were celebrated for their age, but their anomalous features quietly overlooked. Museums displayed casts, academic papers circled the question, and excavation of nearby sites was limited. Proposals for reanalysis were denied, access to the original prints restricted. The Laetoli footprints became a paradox, celebrated yet sanitized. But the ground doesn't lie. What do you do when stone tells a story science won't? Either the timeline is wrong, or something else is. Could a species with modern anatomy and behaviors have existed far earlier than we've imagined? Could evolution, like history, be less a straight ascent and more a tangled web, full of forgotten branches? And if someone walked in shoes 3.6 million years ago, where were they going? What world did they inhabit? What knowledge did they carry on those dusty paths? The Laetoli prints are not just impressions in ash. They are impressions in certainty. They remind us that truth sometimes walks ahead of belief. And when it does, we must decide whether to follow or to look away. In a world where the line between discovery and denial is razor thin, the pattern is as old as the artifacts themselves. Time and again, extraordinary objects surface. Hammers in prehistoric stone, spark plugs in ancient rock, batteries buried beneath empires, machines more advanced than their era should allow. Each one arrives like a whisper from the past, asking us to reconsider everything we thought we knew. And each time, the response is almost ritualistic. Initial curiosity, then discomfort, then dismissal. Institutions that exist to explore the unknown suddenly become gatekeepers of the known. Museums decline to display. Journals decline to publish. Researchers are labeled fringe. Funding evaporates. Sites are closed. Artifacts vanish. But why? Because these objects don't just challenge facts, they challenge frameworks. They suggest that human history may not be a single staircase, climbing neatly from ignorance to understanding. Instead, they hint at cycles, rises and falls of civilizations, bursts of brilliance followed by silence. They imply that knowledge can be lost, not just invented. And that idea is unsettling. It asks us to accept that we are not the pinnacle of history, but part of a pattern we scarcely comprehend. Take the Antikythera mechanism. Its gears still turn in the minds of those who dare to imagine forgotten scholars charting the stars. Or the Baghdad battery, a quiet vessel carrying the memory of forgotten electricity. Or the Klerksdorp spheres, whose perfect grooves cut across 3 billion years. Even if just one of these artifacts is authentic, the implications ripple across every field: history, archaeology, science, philosophy. But acceptance requires letting go. Letting go of tidy timelines. Letting go of the idea that we always know better than those who came before. Letting go of the illusion that progress is linear and permanent. So instead, we deny. We box away anomalies. We protect the story, not the truth. Yet the artifacts remain. Hidden in basements, private collections, or dusty corners of forgotten museums. And they wait, not for proof, but for perspective. Because truth is not what we defend. It is what we discover when we're brave enough to listen. And in the end, perhaps the greatest mystery isn't the objects themselves. It's why we're so afraid of what they might mean. Imagine walking through a museum that doesn't exist, one without walls, where each exhibit is buried beneath centuries, sealed in stone, or lost in time. This invisible museum holds the London hammer, locked in ancient rock, the Antikythera mechanism, ticking away in forgotten silence, the Baghdad battery, once pulsing with current. A spark plug from 500,000 years ago, a wedge of aluminum lying beside extinct bones, footprints in ash, carved like signatures from a different age. These are not relics of myth. They are real, recorded, tested, then tucked away. They are part of a pattern too persistent to ignore. Artifacts like these hint at civilizations that rose before us. Not mythical Atlantis, not alien visitors, but human or human-like cultures that reached heights of science, engineering, and art long before our first recorded empires. Cultures that left behind traces too inconvenient for our narratives. What we are taught is a linear ascent from darkness to light. But perhaps history is not a staircase. Perhaps it's a cycle, a wave, a memory trying to surface. Each object is a contradiction. Each discovery, a quiet revolution. And each silence that follows, a reminder of how fiercely we guard the stories we prefer. We treat anomalies not as doors to deeper understanding, but as threats to our authority over the past. And in doing so, we may be silencing the most profound truths ever offered to us. What would it mean if civilization is older than we think? If minds like ours once stood under ancient skies, charted the stars, forged metals we still can't replicate, and then vanished, forgotten, but not erased? It would mean we are not the beginning. It would mean we are the continuation. In the dust of forgotten objects lies the heartbeat of something vast. A shared heritage, not fully known, a potential we've only begun to rediscover. And perhaps, if we stop turning away, we'll begin to see not just the pieces, but the pattern. A pattern that tells us we've been here before, and we may yet be here again. What binds these scattered relics, hammer, spark plug, mechanism, figurine, is not just their defiance of time. It's the silence that surrounds them. A silence cultivated by fear, by discomfort, by a need for history to remain linear, neat, and controllable. But history isn't neat, and the past, it seems, is far stranger than we've allowed ourselves to believe. These 10 artifacts, so different in form and function, share one uncanny truth. They shouldn't exist. And yet they do. They persist in the margins of science and memory, challenging us not with conspiracy, but with possibility. If even one is genuine, then our understanding of human development, of when we began to think, to build, to dream, must be rewritten. And maybe that's the point. These anomalies are not just archaeological puzzles. They are reminders that knowledge can be lost, that civilizations can fall, that the light of understanding can flicker and go out, but also that it can return. Maybe the hammer and stone isn't just an artifact. Maybe it's a metaphor, a tool once lifted by someone who lived, created, and was forgotten. Maybe the figurine from Nampa isn't just a curiosity. Maybe it's a message across time. We were here. We made beauty too. What do we choose to remember? What do we choose to discard? We are the curators of our own collective story. And sometimes the most human thing we can do is admit we do not know everything, that we are still learning, still searching, still listening to the echoes of those who came before. Because the real treasure in these discoveries is not the objects themselves. It is the invitation they offer, to wonder, to question, to imagine that greatness has visited this world before and may do so again, not in myths, but in memory, not in legend, but in stone. And so we end not with answers, but with a question, perhaps the most important of all: if history can be forgotten, what else might we remember if only we dared to look?